right, chat. I'm deviating from the pattern that we were covering in the Warhammer 40K lore deep dive series because I realized that there was something I entirely forgot to cover when I covered the Space Marines, and I'm not talking about the Horus Heresy because that deserves an entire stream in and of itself, because, oh boy, there's a lot to unpack with the Horus Heresy, trust me. But the thing I'm referring to is, when I covered the Space Marines many episodes ago in the Warhammer 40K lore deep dive series, I neglected to mention their fathers, air quote. I use air quotes because they're more like father figures. The Space Marines of back in the day, during the Heresy era, and even into the modern timeline of Warhammer 40K, they share the same genetic material or gene seed as these men here. But I wouldn't really call them fathers, like in the traditional sense, more like father figures. The Space Marines would absolutely still refer to them as father or gene father, depending on the Legion's proclivities. In the Space Wolves case, it's literally called the All-Father. In the case of the White Scars, they refer to their Primarch as the Great Khan, etc., etc. But that is who we are going to be talking about today. The primogenitors, the leaders of the Space Marine legions, the genetic forebears of all modern, air quotes modern in the chronology of Warhammer 40K, the genetic sires of all Space Marines, the Primarchs. Now, think of when I was describing the Space Marines for the very first time. They are genetically modified, heavily genetically modified human beings that are like over 7 feet tall. They've got like 2 hearts, they've got like 3 stomachs, they can spit acid, yada yada yada. The Primarchs are even a step beyond that. They are a step beyond that. And the Primarch project was created by, or was thought of by the Emperor himself, the God Emperor of mankind. And if anyone's new to that terminology, if anyone's new to this sort of terminology, that's all we know. We don't know this man's real name. He's just simply known as the Emperor, and he is the single being responsible for creating the Imperium, leading humanity into its golden age, and also reuniting the empire of humanity that spanned the galaxy at the time through literally nothing but war and destruction, etc., etc., etc. He may or may not be a godlike being. He may or may not be an actual god. That is entirely up to your own interpretation of things. If you know the lore, I digress. So, I forgot to clear my tabs again. Hold on. I forgot to clear my goddamn tabs again. Because I am a fool. I'll leave those 2 up there, because I actually need to keep those up there. Yeah, sorry, hold on. Okay. Where was I? Oh yeah, so. The reason why... Show me your browser history. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, the Primarch project was thought of, it was the next step of the Emperor's plan to give the 20 legions of Space Marines that the Emperor had created by genetically modifying humans, by genetically modifying humans by the thousands into superhuman warriors, and as to create, sorry, I'm tripping all over my words today. In order to give each of the 20 legions of Space Marines a leader, this is where the Primarch project began. Now, as a part of the genetic augmentation process to turn a regular old normal human being into the genetic superhuman known as a Space Marine, their implants, their modifications would need to be activated somehow, and that's where the genetic material of the Primarchs comes in. So each of the 20 legions of Space Marines would have the genetic material copied from their Primarch, implanted into them in an organ known as a gene seed, and that would activate all the rest of the organic and genetic modifications of the Space Marine, turning them from a human to superhuman. And because of the gene seeds needed to be held somewhere, needed to be cultivated within a living being, that is where the Primarchs themselves come in. So the Primarchs are quite literally what Space Marines are to normal human beings, but to Space Marines as well. So it was on Luna, aka Earth's moon, since Earth is now called Terra in the 41st millennium. Sorry, it would be the 35th millennium if we're following the timeline properly. If we're following the timeline properly. It was on his genetic lab on Luna where the Emperor would be completing the Primarch project. And just before the project was completed, the gods of chaos would swoop in, steal away all 20 infant Primarchs, and scatter them across the galaxy in a bid to stop the Emperor's plan from coming to fruition. And this is when the Emperor would launch the Great Crusade to reunite the Imperium of Man and also relocate his 20 lost sons. Because, in some form or fashion, the Emperor did, in fact, view the 20 Primarchs as his children. It is said that in the creation of all 20 Primarchs, the Emperor imbued a tiny fraction of his own strength and power within each of them. And it is for that reason that the Emperor refers to the Primarchs as his sons. So, now, the Emperor doesn't know what sex is yet fucks. So, as you can see, we have 20 men to cover today. One Primarch was created for each of the 20 Space Marine legions, numbering in the tens of hundreds of thousands. And now, you're probably going to be asking yourself, Chef, why are the 2nd and 11th missing? Why are 2 Primarchs? As a matter of fact, why are 2 entire Space Marine legions deleted from Imperial history? Well, that is because before before the Horus Heresy broke out, before the galaxy-spanning war, the galaxy-spanning civil war that broke out, all 20 Primarchs were relocated and accounted for. However, the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions did something so heinous, so terrible, that the Emperor himself ordered their deaths and their legions to be disbanded and to be reabsorbed into the remaining 18 Imperial Space Marine legions. What they did, who those Primarchs were, who their Space Marine legions were, their names, their deeds, their exploits, their history, everything was erased from Imperial history. It is as if they had never existed. It's as if they never existed. And as a matter of fact, among the 18 remaining Primarchs, they never even speak of the two anymore. As a matter of fact, Rogal Dorn says this in one of the Horus Heresy novels. No one ever spoke of those two absent brothers. Their separate tragedies had seemed like aberrations. Had they, in fact, been warnings that no one heeded? It's revealed later on during the course of the Horus Heresy that one of the other Primarchs was sent to quote-unquote deal with the problem that had arisen in the 2nd and 11th Legions. And it is revealed that the Primarch sent was Layman Russ and his Space Wolves. Which is why Layman Russ eventually gets the nickname of the Emperor's Executioner. Because in the Emperor's own eyes, Russ is the only one who is capable of bringing the full strength of his legion to bear against another legion, against one of their own. And it's also for that reason why a lot of the other Primarchs are a little hesitant to trust Layman Russ and the Space Wolves. There's a reason why the rest of the Primarchs are a little leery to work alongside Layman Russ. But don't worry. Don't worry. Russ is actually a very cool Primarch. The Emperor has a favorite child? Iyashi, you're right, but it's not Layman Russ. You are correct, but it's not Layman Russ. We're actually going to start with the Emperor's favorite child. We are going to start with the first Primarch who was located by the Emperor in his search to find his sons. Ladies and gentlemen and non-binary friends, I give you the Emperor's true favored son. The first of the Primarchs to be relocated, Horus Lupercal. You can tell pretty much right away what kind of theming they were going for Horus. You can tell pretty much immediately what kind of theming they were going for Horus. So, as I said, the 20 Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the gods of chaos in an attempt to, if not entirely stop, but to slow down the Emperor's plan to combat them and to unite the Imperium of Man under one banner. Horus was the first of the Primarchs located by the Emperor. Relocated by the Emperor, rather. His pod landed on the world of Sithonia, a planet, thankfully, close to the Sol system, our solar system. And while he was there, and before the Emperor found him, and this is going to be a recurring theme, right? This is going to be a recurring theme for when the Emperor has to go relocate his sons. It's that just before the Emperor finds them, they go through some sort of trial or tribulation, or something happens where they have to fight for their own survival. That shapes their own personality, that shapes their own belief system, and that in turn will help to shape the belief system and the culture of the legion that they will eventually come to lead. So, in Horus's case, he lands on the planet of Sithonia. He's originally... excuse me. He's originally caught up in gang warfare on Sithonia's surface, but because he's a Primarch, keep in mind, these are all genetically engineered beings, they grow up faster, they tend to learn things faster, they become basically master tacticians and masters at any craft they sort of get their hands on, right? Right. Eventually, Horus himself, sorry. I keep pausing because I can't tell if my stomach is being weird or not. Hold on. Chat, I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. My stomach is being very, very weird right now. Hold on. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm much better now. Holy cow. Ooh, that sucked. that sucked. Sorry about that. Ooh, God. I'm not gonna go into detail about what just happened, but man, that sucked. All right. Whew. Okay. So, hi. Sorry about that. I'm back. I'm feeling better now. I'm okay. I'm good. So, where were we? Right. So, Horus's pod lands on the world of Sithonia. Thankfully, very close to the Sol system, so the Emperor was able to find him very, very quickly. Hence why Horus was the first Primarch found. And as a result, while commanding the remainder of the Space Marine legions, Horus and the Emperor would often find themselves fighting side by side, and because of that, the Horus, by default, basically became the Emperor's right-hand man when it came to all things in tactics, strategy, and battle, right? And it was for that reason that Horus but was basically the Emperor's sort of unofficial favorite among the Primarchs, because the Emperor and Horus had spent so much time together relocating the rest of Horus's brothers, relocating the remainder of the Primarchs, that Horus was basically second in command. And by the time the Great Crusade rolled around, Horus would remain second in command, expanding Imperial territory across the galaxy with his father, the Emperor, relocating the rest of his brothers, and leading the Crusade across the stars. And it would be at the apex of the Great Crusade where the Emperor would leave. The Emperor would proclaim Horus as War Master, and that he was to be the one commanding the Space Marine legions in the Great Crusade in the Emperor's absence. And while the Emperor himself would return to Holy Terra to continue this great secret project of his. And what that project was the Emperor wanted a way for humanity to tap into the Eldar Webway, which is basically a gateway, a system of gateways spanning the galaxy, which enabled instantaneous travel from one point in the galaxy to another without having to brave the warp. And the Emperor wanted a part of that. He wanted to basically help humanity break into the Eldar Webway, and he was very close to doing so, which is why he appointed Horus as War Master and left to go back to Terra. He did this at the worst possible time. Because it was at this time when Horus would betray the Emperor. It is called the Horus Heresy for a reason. The Emperor's favored son, his second in command, would take half of his brothers, rally them to his own banner, and proceed to tear the galaxy in half. Horus would be blessed by all 4 Chaos gods, elevating him to the chosen champion of Chaos, and he would tear the galaxy in half along with the rest of his traitorous brethren, and carve a path of death and destruction all the way to Terra. He wanted to take the Golden Throne for himself. Now, believe it or not, Horus was not the instigator. He was not the first of the Primarchs to fall to the corruption of Chaos. He was just the one chosen as champion. Because unbeknownst to Horus himself, his brother, Lorgar Aurelian, was the one, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers Legion, ironically enough. Lorgar was the one, because of his studious nature and his love of all things, his love of all knowledge, forbidden and otherwise, he would be the first Primarch to fall under the sway of the Chaos Gods. And it was Lorgar who would go on to corrupt Horus, and it was Horus who would go on to corrupt his legion, and then basically bring half of his brothers under that banner. The books are evil. Exactly. So, it was because of Lorgar. It was because, and that is why Imperial history books refer to Lorgar Aurelian as the first heretic. Appropriate, yes? Yes. So, without diving too deeply into the Horus Heresy, because as I mentioned before, that deserves an entire episode on its own, Horus would rally a whole bunch of his brothers to his own banner. Horus and his legion, by the way, known as the Luna Wolves, who would also rename themselves as the Sons of Horus, would rally together the Emperor's children, the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, the Thousand Sons, the Word Bearers, and the Alpha Legion against the remaining loyalist Primarchs and their legions. And that is... Chef, you're probably thinking to yourself, Chef, that seems one-sided. You're right. It is. Because remember, Horus was the one who was appointed War Master. He had tactical acumen on par with the God Emperor himself. So already the loyalist legions and their Primarchs were already on the back foot when Horus made his heresy, his rebellion, public. Also, hey Galaxy Prime, how are you? Yeah, we're doing lore drop today. We're doing lore drop today, and throughout the course of the Horus Heresy, there were many times when Horus was like inches away from victory, but the loyalists would rally together and thwart him at every single turn. And it was during the closing years of the Horus Heresy. Sorry, my brain stuttered there for a second. It was during the closing years or decades of the heresy that Horus would be elevated, would ascend to be the chosen champion of all 4 Chaos gods. A little backstory to that, just in case you're a little confused. The 4 gods of Chaos, Khorne, Slanesh, Tzeentch, and Nurgle, will mark certain beings or mortals as their chosen champion, as their favored champion. They rarely ever work together to elevate one being as the undivided champion of chaos, but for Horus, they did so, because in Horus they saw their one answer to the God Emperor's grand plan. So that all four of them marked Horus at once and elevated him to the status of champion of chaos. And what that meant was that Horus was now just as powerful, some would say slightly more powerful, than even the Emperor himself. That is how powerful Horus would become towards the end of the Horus Heresy, towards the end of his rebellion. Horus would eventually lead his heresy, his rebellion, to Holy Terra itself, to Earth itself, and it would come down to a point. It would come down to a point where the Emperor would take a boarding party onto Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, in a last-ditch effort to defeat Horus and stop the rebellion. Can't delete my own shit posts. Yeah, now the whole internet's gonna see that, Yashi. Good job. Oh my god. No! What's it called? The Emperor would lead a boarding party onto Horus's flagship, which was at this point in orbit above Holy Terra, literally above the Golden Throne itself, above the Imperial Palace. Because the Emperor knew the only person who would be strong enough to stop Horus at this point in time would be himself. So he took two of his sons with him. He took two other Primarchs with him: Rogal Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, and Sanguinius, the Primarch of the Blood Angels, as well as Constantine Valdor, the leader of the Imperial Palace Guard, literally the leader of the Adeptus Custodes. So he took three of his most powerful warriors with him. They teleported onto the Vengeful Spirit. Their target was the very bridge of the Vengeful Spirit where they knew Horus would be. However, because of chaos magic shenanigans, they got scattered throughout the ship and had to fight their way to Horus himself. Unfortunately, neither Dorn, nor the Emperor, nor Valdor were the first person to reach the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit and confront Horus. The Primarch of the Blood Angels did. Sanguinius. And yes, when we get to Sanguinius, I will explain why he has wings, because he legitimately has wings. I know it's very on the nose. The Primarch of the Blood Angels has wings. Yeah, I know. About as subtle as an atom bomb, I know. But we'll get there, don't worry. We'll get there, don't worry. So, Sanguinius is the one who first reaches the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, and he confronts Horus. He doesn't immediately go in swinging, but he confronts Horus. He just wants to know why. What happened? Horus explains himself. He says that I've been shown things I can explain to you, things that will open your eyes. Our father is a liar. He never cared for us. He thought of us only as tools to be used in a greater plan. We were never meant to have any will of our own. And it's at that point that, Horus does the villain thing. He goes into the full villain mode. He extends an offer to Sanguinius, and he says, join me. Join me, and I will I can show you why our father, the man purporting himself to be a god, is false. I'm the only one who can lead the Imperium into a brighter tomorrow. And Sanguinius, being Sanguinius, refuses. Because A, his loyalty lies with the Imperium and the God Emperor, but B, and I'll go into this more when we actually cover Sanguinius. Sanguinius had a gift. All the Emperor's sons, all the Primarchs, again, have a fraction of the Emperor's strength and abilities imbued in them since their creation, correct? For Sanguinius, he was given the gift of foresight. He knew that this was going to happen. He knew he was going to be the one to find Horus first. He knew he was going to be the one to confront Horus and then try to stop him. And Sanguinius even foresaw his own defeat, and more horrifically, his own death at Horus's hands. And even with the gift of foresight, even with seeing that talking or even fighting Horus would be a fruitless endeavor, Sanguinius drew his sword and attacked Horus. Because at the very least, in his mind, in Sanguinius' mind, he knew that he had to at least try. He had to, at the very least, buy time for the Emperor to get to the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. And even for a Primarch as powerful as Sanguinius, he could not stand up against Horus Ascended. He could not stand up against the might of Horus, blessed by all four gods of chaos. But before Sanguinius perished, before the mortal blow was struck by Horus, Sanguinius actually accomplished his goal. Before Horus struck down Sanguinius, he actually managed to tear open a tiny part of Horus's armor. He actually managed to breach Horus's armor. And as Sanguinius lay dying, the last thing he saw was the Emperor, his father, enter the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. And it was at that point when the Emperor finally confronted Horus, because up until that very moment, the Emperor was thinking to himself, I don't have to kill him. I shouldn't have to kill him. Maybe there is still a chance I can save Horus from the grip of the gods of chaos. I can bring him back into the fold. But as soon as the Emperor entered the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit and saw the body of his son, and saw the body of Sanguinius dead at the feet of Horus, that is when the Emperor decided, no, he is not worth saving. He cannot be saved. The clash between the Emperor and Horus on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit, high in orbit above Holy Terra, above the very palace of the Imperium of Mankind, is the stuff of legend. It is the power of all four Chaos gods imbued into a single mortal champion against the single most psychically gifted and psychically powerful being humanity has ever produced. It was literally, to the bystanders, the Custodes and the members of the Sons of Horus, who were on the Vengeful Spirit at the time, it was a battle like two gods made flesh, one-on-one, just attempting to annihilate one another. And it was because of Sanguinius' sacrifice, because of the fact that he managed to breach Horus's armor, that the Emperor was able to defeat and destroy Horus. but at great cost, because the Emperor himself was also mortally wounded in that battle. Their leader dead and gone, the Sons of Horus would retreat into the Eye of Terror and would essentially disband until Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Sons of Horus, would rally the Legion back under him, but that's a story for another time. The Emperor himself would go on to be interred within the Golden Throne on Terra, which would then lead to the absolute state of, what's the word I'm looking for? Stagnation that the Imperium of Man is currently in the 41st millennium. But that is the story of Horus, Primarch of the Sons of Horus, formerly known as the Luna Wolves. The first Primarch ever located by the Emperor. You know what? As long as I have him open, as long as I have his page open, we might as well, because were it not for Sanguinius' sacrifice, Horus would not have been defeated. We might as well talk about Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, the 9th Legion of Space Marines. Sanguinius, as you can probably tell, was born with a mutation. And spoilers, he would not be the only He would not be the only Primarch to be born with a mutation, but we'll get there. We'll get there. So, as you can probably tell, Sanguinius was born with a mutation. He was born with 2 very angelic-looking wings. And before you ask, yes, even when fully armored and arrayed for battle, the wings could still grant Sanguinius flight. It's actually really cool. I'm not gonna lie. Aesthetically, Sanguinius is my favorite looking Primarch. I'm not gonna lie. Just the gold armor, the spear, and the angel wings. That's very, very cool. That's very, very cool. Sanguinius would land on the planet of Baal, a planet absolutely rife with mutant abominations. The human population on Baal were being mutated by the forces of chaos, and were trying to, overrun the planet, overrun the actual, normal humans of the planet. So Sanguinius would eventually rise to a position where he would help, right? He would lead a successful defense and purge the mutant infestation from the planet of Baal. But, the people of Baal, they didn't see Sanguinius' wings as a terrible mutation, as a sign of corruption or what have you. No, they actually saw it as sort of a divine intervention. They would see Sanguinius as their savior. And when the Emperor reunited Sanguinius with his legion, the Blood Angels, they would claim Baal as their chapter planet, their home planet. The population of Baal, those who were well enough, would be recruited into the ranks of the Blood Angels, and Sanguinius would also use his other gifts to help, for lack of a better word, because it's the only word that comes to mind at the moment, to help beautify Baal. Because Sanguinius was, in addition to being a Primarch, in addition to being a warrior, in addition to being this avenging knight, this avenging angel, as they would call him, Sanguinius was also, first and foremost, an artisan. He was very, very appreciative of the arts and architecture, and it's something that even the Blood Angels, that sort of tradition, the Blood Angels also continue on to this day, even in the modern timeline of Warhammer 40K. aesthetically, they are, they enjoy things like art and architecture. However, as nice and as pretty as this all sounds, Sanguinius and the Blood Angels, they harbored a dark secret. They harbored a dark secret that Sanguinius and the Blood Angels would tell no one about. And it was something that they called the Red Thirst. For whatever reason, members of the Blood Angels would succumb to the Red Thirst in the heat of battle. And what that would mean is they would basically go into a blood frenzy. They would go on like a massive butchering rampage. They would not only defeat their enemies, they would tear them limb from limb. They would paint their armor with the blood of the fallen enemies. Some would even go so far as to drink the blood of their enemies and consume their flesh. And Sanguinius knew what would happen if the word of any sort of taint or mutation or corruption within a Space Marine Legion would reach the ears of the Emperor. He knew what would happen. He knew for a fact that if that was to reach the words or reach the ears of the Emperor, he would be getting a visit from Layman Russ and the Space Wolves, much like the other two legions did. Or should I say, other three legions did, but we'll get to the Thousand Sons very, very soon, don't worry. So, Sanguinius strove to hide that, he strove to hide that fact from the other Primarchs. He strove to hide that fact from the Emperor, etc., etc. He did not want anyone to know of this flaw known as the Red Thirst. Unfortunately, despite many, many attempts, the Red Thirst still persists as a flaw into modern iterations of the Blood Angels and even their successor chapters. They are still plagued with the Red Thirst. However, it would be far worse. It would be far worse for current Blood Angels in the Warhammer 40K timeline. Because, remember, Sanguinius foresaw his own doom at Horus's hand. And unfortunately, at the very moment that Sanguinius died, because again, each member of their Space Marine Legion has a bit of the gene seed from their Primarch within them. And the Blood Angels are no different. When Sanguinius died, the psychic backlash was felt by every single Blood Angels Space Marine in the very moment Sanguinius was killed. And that left an imprint on them and the gene seed as well. And what that sort of evolved into is what modern Blood Angels call the Black Rage, where a Blood Angel will start receiving visions as if he himself is Sanguinius, battling against Horus, fighting a desperate fight to try and at least damage Horus before the Emperor arrives. It turns them into a mindless berserker on the battlefield. And when that happens to a Blood Angel now, there's really no cure. They just send them off onto the battlefield and hope, just hope for a productive death, essentially, is what it is. As bleak as that sounds, as horrific as that sounds, that's literally all they can do. There's no cure for the Black Rage, or the Black Death, as it's called. As a matter of fact, the Blood Angels will actually before the eve of battle, they will go throughout the army that they've assembled for war, and any who are marked as having succumbed to the Black Rage are gathered into special squads known as the Death Company. And they're just unleashed onto the battlefield, weapons in hand, frothing at the mouth, ready to just go out in a blood-soaked blaze of glory. So despite their angelic, almost soft demeanor, the Blood Angels carry on. They're very bloodthirsty and often very gruesome work of their Primarch as well. All right. I touched upon him briefly. I mentioned him briefly. He is the first heretic. He is the first Primarch to succumb to the words of the Chaos Gods. This is Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word Bearers Space Marine Legion. They are the 17th. They are the 17th Legion of Space Marines. And Lorgar was how I like to describe Lorgar as, let me push my dad's buttons. Let me push my dad's buttons, okay? So, Lorgar, from a very early age, when he landed on the planet of... How do you pronounce that? I never remember how to pronounce this. When he landed on this planet... I'm sorry, I just never know how to pronounce that. When he... all the other homeworlds are so easy. This one just throws me for a goddamn loop. Colchisian, thank you. Okay, there it is. When he landed on the planet of Colchisian from a early age, and again, keep in mind, the Primarchs were genetically designed to grow up very, very quickly. They were designed to grow up and learn and reach maturity very, 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 very quickly, right? Even from a young age, Lorgar had an aptitude for just a thirst for knowledge, right? My man's so smart, he got runes on his head. Yeah, pretty much. So, Lorgar would like bury himself in teachings and books and ancient knowledge. Specifically, Lorgar was drawn to religious texts. And it was Lorgar who first started, or who first sort of broached the idea that the God Emperor was quite literally that. A god made flesh. It was Lorgar who started to spread the word that the Emperor should be worshipped as such throughout the Imperium. And he would put to the sword any planet that would disagree with him. What he began calling the Imperial truth is that, you know, the Emperor, my father, the leader of the Imperium of mankind, is a godlike being, is divine, is a god made flesh in the world, and should be venerated as such. And when the Emperor found this out, the Emperor went up to Lorgar and was like, you need to stop this. I am not a god. I am not a godlike being. I do not need to be worshipped as such. Because believe it or not, the Emperor the Emperor actually really had a disdain for the concept of fanatic religion. Like, legitimately. He had an absolute disdain for the fanaticism of religious types, and he wanted to nip that in the bud as soon as possible. He wanted Lorgar and his legion to stop treating him like he was some sort of divine being, like he was some sort of god made real. He wanted Lorgar to stop that. And for a time, Lorgar did, but he eventually just sort of started picking it up again. He's just like, no, you... He in Lorgar's own mind, he couldn't understand why his father didn't want to embrace godhood, didn't want to embrace the power and the responsibility of being a god. And it was at that point where the Chaos Gods, the actual Chaos Gods, got in Lorgar's ear. Hey, Thunder, what's going on, buddy? So... exactly 43 years before the start of what would be known as the Horus Heresy is when Lorgar first found evidence of the four gods of chaos. Ingthel the Ascendant, a demon prince of chaos, would be the first one to make contact with Lorgar. And he would actually start feeding into Lorgar's ideas, feeding into Lorgar's ideas and ideals and visions that, you're right, your father is a god. And he's wrong to not embrace the power that godhood entails. And they just started feeding him all these ideas, what he called the primordial truth of the universe, is that the Emperor isn't godly. They turned all of Lorgar's ideas on their head. And they showed him just exactly what the universe truly is. It is, and just how powerful, how far-reaching the gods of chaos actually, truly are. And it was at that point when Lorgar said, yes, you're right. My father, the Emperor, isn't a god. He is false. He is a charlatan. There's only one true power in this universe. And it was at that point that Lorgar began to educate his legion, the word bearers. They would remain the word bearers, but the word they would bear now is not the glory of the Emperor and the glory of the Imperium, but of the Chaos Gods themselves. And it was because of Lorgar where Horus would become corrupted, swayed to the side of chaos, and then eventually elevated to become champion of all four Chaos Gods. Lorgar himself, during the course of the Horus Heresy, would obviously fight on the side of heresy, where he was also eventually elevated to the rank of Demon Prince or Demon Primarch of Chaos, and he would continue to lead the Word Bearers Legion up until the modern point of Warhammer 40K. He is still attained. He is still has and holds the rank of Demon Prince of the Word Bearers. Excuse me. Where are those damn Chaos Emeralds? So Lorgar actually did manage to survive the Horus Heresy. He wasn't killed. He wasn't destroyed by the Emperor. No, he actually attained demonhood and continues to lead the Word Bearers, Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines to up until the modern timeline of Warhammer 40K. So now we're going to go from one traitor to... I'm kind of alternating here between traitor and loyalist Primarchs. And now this one is entirely this one's entirely me, okay? This one's for me, because this is my Space Marine chapter, this is my Space Marine Legion, and Vulcan is my personal favorite Primarch ever. I love Vulcan. All right. Vulcan is the Primarch of the Salamanders Legion, the 18th Legion of Space Marines. The Salamanders, sorry, rewind. Vulcan's capsule, when he, much like the rest of his brothers, were scattered across the galaxy by the Chaos Gods, Vulcan landed on the planet of Nocturne, a volcanically unstable, volatile world where a combination of plate tectonics and volcanic activity rendered like 80% of the surface of the planet uninhabitable. But the humans who did live there, who did live on Nocturne, were some of the toughest and hardiest human beings in the galaxy. It was there that Vulcan would be raised by a blacksmith, appropriately enough, and would learn the secrets of forging weapons and armor, etc. et al. During what is known on Nocturne as the Time of Great Upheaval, Vulcan set out and was I'm getting ahead of myself because I really just want to talk about Vulcan because he's so badass. Vulcan would lead the defense of some of the villages on Nocturne because unfortunately Nocturne was raided quite frequently by Dark Eldar. He would help the villages defend themselves against Dark Eldar attacks, and legends say that Vulcan himself single-handedly defended a village on Nocturne from a massive raid of Dark Eldar forces. Like, single-handedly. Because even as a child, he was just that powerful. Again, as all Primarchs are, right? So one day, as Vulcan was going through his business, a stranger wandered into town. Boasting that he could best anyone in the village. To which the people just laughed because they knew Vulcan. They saw all the things he had done for them. And literally, like, all the villagers' response was like, Vulcan's the best of us. You can't beat him. To which the stranger responded, okay, I'll take that bet. So this stranger and Vulcan would compete in different activities. Anvil lifts, tests of strengths and endurance. The number of contests they had pitted against one another has been lost to time, but the end result is the same. It all ended up in a tie. And as the decider, the Vulcan and the stranger would have 24 hours to go out into the wilds of Nocturne to find and slay the largest salamander that they could find. And salamanders are drakes native to Nocturne. They're massive, massive beasts who breathe fire. And in trying to hunt down and slay an adult salamander is a daunting task, even for a Primarch. So the stranger and Vulcan would go out. They would kill a very, very large salamander. And Vulcan would be the one to find and kill a very large salamander, and on his way back to the village, a massive volcano, the largest on the planet, Mount Deathfire, would erupt. Caught off guard and off balance because of the large beast that he was carrying, Vulcan was thrown off the edge of a cliff, and he was, with one hand, he was holding on to the cliff, keeping himself from falling into the lava, and then the other hand, he was holding his prized fire drake. And he was holding on for dear life, trying to figure out how to get himself back to safety without losing his prize, and that's when the stranger showed up, carrying a fire drake that was notably larger than Vulcan's. So Vulcan immediately realized, I'm going to lose this contest. He's going to get back to the village first with a larger fire drake. I'm going to lose this contest. Even if I save myself, even if I save this drake, I'm going to lose this goddamn contest. The stranger let go of his fire drake. He cast it aside. It fell into the lava, never to be seen again. And he stopped to help Vulcan. He saved Vulcan and his fire drake, and they both walked back into the village together. And the people are celebrating, Vulcan won, etc., etc. And Vulcan responded, no, you don't understand. This stranger, this person, he was the one who captured a larger fire drake than mine. He gave it up to save me. And it was at that moment where the stranger responded, of course not. I could not bear to lose my son after I had just found him. The stranger revealed himself to be the God Emperor himself, the God Emperor of mankind. And he knew he had found Vulcan immediately. And upon revealing himself as the Emperor, Vulcan knelt and, swore loyalty to the Emperor on the spot because of that selfless sacrifice. Right? Giga Chat, exactly. It was that sort of self-sacrifice, that sort of selflessness that Vulcan wanted to extend to his legion, to the Salamander's Legion. The Salamanders would claim Nocturne as their chapter planet, as their home planet. And the Legion would be named the Salamanders. So, again, taking the lessons that Vulcan learned throughout his life and extending it to the Legion themselves. And so Vulcan, can I just say, by the way, fully armored, Vulcan looks so badass. Like, honestly? Can we talk about how amazing this is? Like, holy shit. Fully armored, Vulcan is incredible. Like, dude. So, remember when I said that each Primarch received a gift, a fraction of the Emperor's power and ability? Vulcan's gift would make itself very well known during the days of the Great Crusade. And it would happen during the opening battle of the Great Crusade. The Istvan V Drop Site Massacre. It was during an assault on the planet of Istvan V where Horus and his traitorous brethren would make their rebellion known. In a joint assault, what Horus was telling the rest of his brothers would be a joint assault. His legion, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, led by Corvus Corax, and the Iron Hands, led by Ferrus Manus, would be assaulting the planet of Istvan V alongside Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children, Conrad Kurz and the Night Lords, and Pertrabo of the Iron Warriors. But unbeknownst to Vulcan, Corax, and Ferrus Manus, this was an ambush. This was an ambush. As soon as they made landfall, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, the Emperor's Children, and the Sons of Horus, still known as the Luna Wolves at that time, opened fire on the combined forces of the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, and the Iron Hands. They opened fire on their own brothers. And that was the first shots of the Horus Heresy. And as a result, the Salamanders Legion, the Raven Guard Legion, and the Iron Hands Legion, unfortunately, were brought very low. They lost they lost a majority of their legion in that ambush. However, this is where Vulcan's special gift was made known to the rest of his brothers. Because Vulcan died on Istvan V. He was killed in battle on Istvan V and came back to life, and then died again, and then came back to life yet again. Vulcan is what is known as a perpetual. He can be killed in any way possible. He will immediately be reborn, brought back to life with no injuries very shortly afterwards. He can die and be reborn any number of times. And also, and as a result, technically, Vulcan is immortal. Vulcan is absolutely 100% technically immortal. So it was at that point where it's just like he was shrugging off wounds that would bring low not just a Space Marine but a Primarch. And he continued to fight on, trying to rally what remained of the Salamander's Legion behind him to get off the planet to survive. And it was at this point, Conrad Kurz, Primarch of the Night Lords. It's when Conrad noticed what was happening, that he saw Vulcan being reborn again and again, coming back from certain death time after time. That Kurz said, "Oh, that's cool. Oh, that just means I can torture you endlessly, because as you can tell, Kurz is kind of what we like to call a psychopath." Can you tell? Can you tell? Kurz would go on to capture Vulcan. He wanted the secrets behind Vulcan's immortality, behind his nature as a perpetual. And in doing so, he would visit upon Vulcan horrendous amounts of torture. horrendous amounts of torture. Oh my god. The only reason Kurz kept Vulcan alive was to just experiment on how much pain can you take? What does it take to kill you? Do you feel yourself dying each time you die? Shit like that. Kurz ain't all up there in the head. Kurz ain't all up there in the brain, as we say. So, eventually, Vulcan would escape Kurz. He would find his way to Ultramar, the realm of Rabute Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. As I like to call him, Robot Girly Man, Primarch of the Ultra Smurfs. We'll get to him, don't worry. But because the amount of torture, the amount of pain that Vulcan suffered at the hands of Conrad Kurz, combined with the sheer number of times he had to basically regenerate and come back to life, Vulcan had gone crazy. He had snapped. Like his psyche was entirely shattered. And by the time he got to Ultramar and was found by Rabute Gilliman, he was basically feral at this point. So Gilliman took it upon himself to place his brother in stasis and then return his brother's body to Nocturne. His home planet, his home world. And it was there within the fire of Mount Deathfire, again, the largest volcano on the planet, and the volcano that brought the Vulcan and the Emperor together in the first place. Look at that thematic storytelling coming back to itself, where Vulcan was not only reborn again, but also restored. His sanity was restored. Right? Vulcan would go on to lead the remains of his legion in the defense of the Siege of Terra, but not on Terra itself. Vulcan would lead the Salamanders directly into the webway to try and halt Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns. We'll get to him eventually. Also, don't you worry. Where he would duel his now demon ascended brother, right? Therapy, expensive. Visiting a volcano, free. Vulcan, to make a long story short, because I could keep going on and on and on about Vulcan and his journey through the end of the heresy, but towards the end of the heresy, and even long afterwards, during the War of the Beast, the largest orc invasion the galaxy had ever seen, Vulcan would again appear. It'd be 1,500 years later, but he would appear and lead the defense against the Beast, the largest orc wall ever. Afterwards, it was assumed. I have to emphasize this, right? It was assumed that Vulcan had perished in battle. But because we know that Vulcan is a perpetual, is both immortal and can regenerate himself from any injury, it's I would say pretty damn certain that Vulcan had survived this encounter. If he can survive the Horus Heresy, if he can survive being tortured endlessly by Conrad Kurz, he can survive, a war against the orcs, right? Right. But regardless of that, his body was actually never found. What the Salamanders, however, did locate were the artifacts of Vulcan, bound together in something that is now known as the Tome of Fire. And what this is sort of a prophecy that if the Salamanders prove themselves worthy enough to locate all of the artifacts of Vulcan and unite them again on Nocturne, Vulcan will return and lead them once more. And that is what the Salamanders continue to do today. And honestly, this is why I love Vulcan. He's like, no matter what gets thrown at him, he just keeps on standing back up, and it's so good. So, going from a very noble and very loyal Primarch to probably one of the most deranged Primarchs I have ever seen. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the Night Lords. You know, I'm just gonna say it. The most mentally unstable Primarch of the entire bunch. I'm just gonna say it. The most mentally unstable Primarch of the entire bunch. I think you mean one of the most badass. What up, Makazi? How are you doing, buddy? So, Conrad's stasis pod landed on the world of Nostromo. And basically, Nostromo was a world shrouded in night. And Conrad very quickly found out that, or very quickly learned rather, that the only thing that actually holds any sort of power, the only way to hold any sort of power on Nostromo was to become something the other people feared. Because the world was basically exploited by the rich and the powerful and the influential, while the normal, regular, everyday people were exploited and cowered in fear by the, those who ruled above them. And Kurz, unlike any other Primarch who had either a friend, a confidant, or a family to help raise them, Kurz raised himself. He basically was just roaming the streets by himself, looting and killing whatever he needed. And so eventually over the years, Kurz would focus his gifts, his art of killing and murder and fear on the criminal element, the rampant criminal elements of the planet of Nostromo. And it got to the point where people would start telling stories of a being or a person they would call the Night Haunter. Like, be careful. Don't let yourself being caught doing any sort of crime, because the Night Haunter is going to find you and kill you. And if at this point you're thinking to yourself, Chef, this is just Batman but more grimdark, you're right. This is Batman if he actually killed people. You're right. This is Batman if he had no qualms of just gutting somebody. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Yes. So eventually, to make a long story short, because we're going to be here for hours on end if I keep going on about this. Eventually, Conrad Kurz would quite literally kill and murder his way to being the undisputed ruler of Nostromo. The Night Haunter would take control of Nostromo, and he would rule it with a ruthless iron fist. He would rule the planet through fear and terror. And it was in that moment, it was in that sort of state where the Emperor just so happened to land on Nostromo alongside Lorgar, Dorn, Manus, and Fulgrim. And because Nostromo is perpetually shrouded in night and darkness, like physically and literally, when the Emperor showed up, you know, because he's clad in golden armor, his psychic powers literally creating a radiance of light around him. Lorgar hated that. Sorry, not Lorgar. Conrad. Conrad hated that. Conrad did his best work in the darkness, and he was disgusted. He was like disgusted by how, you know, how could this person embrace the light when the light basically is everything Conrad Kurz stood against, right? And it would lead to this sort of interaction when the Emperor and his delegation made it to the throne room where Conrad Kurz sat, right? At the end of the broad road leading to the Night Hunter's palace, the Primarchs stood, waiting for the delegation to approach. And as they did, he succumbed to a vision so potent and so horrifying, he immediately tried to claw his own eyes out, but was stopped by the Emperor. The Night Haunter looked at the Emperor and his brothers, and it is said that he foresaw the fates of all of them, as well as his own death. He then looked at his father, and the following dialogue ensued. Conrad Kurz, be at peace, for I have arrived, and I intend to take you home. That is not my name, father. I am the Night Haunter. I know full well what you intend for me. Now, whether or not that was Kurz's own vision of what was going to happen, or if that was a vision implanted in his brain by the gods of chaos, none can really say. But that vision would plague Kurz for the rest of his life. So, Kurz would learn the ways of war from Fulgrim, and by the time, but he would also retain some of the brutality and terror that made him powerful on Nostromo, and he would continue to teach that to his own legion, which he renamed the Night Lords, appropriately enough. Now, during the early days of the Great Crusade, the Night Lords and Conrad Kurz would obviously fight alongside the Emperor and bring worlds into the fold under the Imperial banner. But the way Kurz and the Night Lords went about it even gave the Emperor pause, because the Emperor was very worried with the fact that every world that the Night Lords and Kurz would conquer, they would be terrified of the Space Marines and their Primarch. They would live underneath a shadow of fear, because that is how Kurz would prosecute his wars, even in the name of the Emperor. And the Emperor even just got to a point where it's just like, maybe dial it back a little bit. Just, you know, rein it in. Rein it in, right? Just rein it in. But when Sorry, I'm just trying to read where to go to next. When Kurz was reintroduced to his legion, like he taught them all that he knew in terms of like brutality. Kurz was still quite very unique among the Primarchs because of the fact he hated his legion. He could not stand being around his legionnaires. Right? He hated his own legionnaires within the Night Lords, because he viewed them as the very criminals he sought to stamp out on Nostromo. So it was just very strange dynamic. It's a very, very strange dynamic. So, when the Horus Heresy broke out, it was very easy. It was very, very easy for Lorgar and Horus to convince Conrad Kurz, what's it called? It was very, very easy to convince Conrad Kurz and the Night Lords to join on the side of Horus and his rebellion. Because at this point, Kurz thought to himself, I have nothing in common with the Emperor and what he's trying to create. I will forge my own path. So, and as I mentioned earlier with Vulcan, he wanted to try and figure out like what makes you tick. How are you able to not die? Or like, you know, he wanted to inflict both fear and pain and also suffering upon Vulcan just so he can perfect his own art that way. And so throughout the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords would continue to visit just nothing but pain and suffering, fear and terror on loyalist forces, not just the Space Marine legions, but keep in mind also the Imperial Army, who had also sworn loyalty to the side of the Emperor. Kurz would fight against a few of his brothers, actually, not just Vulcan, but he would fight more notably against the Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson. These two literally would go one-on-one on many, many different occasions. Excuse me. Just sipping on my coffee. So much like Sanguinius, Kurz would have visions as well. He would also have visions of the future. And in one of those visions, you know, the vision that plagued him for literally the rest of his life, he would see his own death, right? He would see his own eventual death, which is kind of why Kurz was so much of a loose cannon. He was so much of a loose cannon, which is why he didn't care. And at that point, after a duel against Lionel Johnson, you know, Kurz was defeated by Johnson, but Johnson could not bring himself to kill Conrad Kurz. You know, despite everything he had done during the course of the heresy, he could not bring himself to kill someone he viewed as a brother, a wayward brother, but as a brother. So instead of killing him outright, he disarmed Kurz and just broke his back, clapped him in chains, and brought him to stand trial before the rest of his brothers. And after the Horus Heresy, after the Horus Heresy, and after Kurz escaped, right? Kurz was eventually located and cornered by a Calidus assassin. An assassin sent specifically to kill the Night Haunter. The Calidus assassin M. Shen was the one. I keep hearing, despite knowing better, the Horus Heresy, and that's a very different 40k expansion. That very much is, yes. So, I'm actually going to read this word for word because this is a very cool little exchange here, right? This is a very, very cool little exchange. When M. Shen, the assassin M. Shen, finally corners Conrad Kurz, right? Check this out. Kurz fully knew when he would be slain down to the anointed hour, and in the time before his death, he conversed with a corpse statue that he addressed as the Emperor. Surprisingly, the corpse spoke back, and apparently the Emperor assured Kurz that his insanity was never his fault and he acted as intended until chaos interfered. Kurz broke down the Emperor questioned his belief that fate was predetermined, stating that he himself had chosen this very path. He tore the corpse puppet to pieces, and it's unclear if it was actually the Emperor speaking or one of Kurz's hallucinations. Later that night, it is believed that the assassin M. Shen was allowed to infiltrate his palace, as she encountered no guards between herself and Kurz's throne room. When confronted, Kurz simply said, "Your presence does not surprise me, assassin. I have known of you ever since your craft entered the Eastern Fringe. Why did I not have you killed? Because your mission and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of all I have ever said or done. I merely punished those who had wronged, just as your false emperor now seeks to punish me. Death is nothing compared to vindication." The vidlog then shows M. Shen leaping forward, and although the kill was never confirmed, as the video feed cuts out just before their fight begins, it is believed that the Night Haunter allowed himself to be killed. He saw himself as a murderous and corrupt villain, the very thing he had sought to destroy from the beginning. Regardless, his final words are considered to be one of the great enigmas of Imperial history. So it's basically confirmed that yes, M. Shen was successful in her mission to assassinate Conrad Kurz. Whether or not he is actually dead remains to be seen. But as of now, Kurz is listed as dead, and his legion is listed as scattered throughout the Eye of Terror within the warp, periodically raiding real space whenever the rest of the Chaos forces see fit to do so. Now, let's get this big boy out of the way, because memes aside, I actually have a respect for Robute Guilliman and the Ultramarines. I legitimately do. Memes aside, the Papa Smurf memes aside, Guilliman is legitimately one of the... He is a major player in the Horus Heresy, and even in the modern timeline for Warhammer 40K, because Guilliman is one of 2 loyalist Primarchs that have actually made their return in the modern timeline of Warhammer 40K. So, Robute Guilliman, much like his brothers, his stasis pod would land on a world that would eventually be known as Ultramar. Guilliman would have the privilege of being raised by would have the privilege of being raised by some very influential and high-ranking people within Ultramar society on the world of Macragge as well. He would learn tactics, he would be schooled, and by the time, again, to make a long story short, by the time the Emperor would locate Guilliman, by the time the Emperor would locate his son, he would not find a world in chaos. He would not even find a primitive world. He would find a thriving, modernized, fully industrial, spacefaring society that Guilliman was now under, was fully in control of. As a matter of fact, sorry, yeah, here we go. I had to find it. It was down here. When the Emperor reached Macragge, he found a world that was self-sufficient, prosperous, with a strong and well-equipped military, engaging in trade with nearby star systems. Impressed, the Emperor assigned command of the Ultramarine Space Marine Legion to Guilliman and relocated the Legion's forward base to the world of Macragge. Now, here's where things get a little iffy. Here's where things get a little iffy, right? Remember what I said? It was around this time when a little funky. Yes, exactly. Remember when I said it was around this time that 2 of the legions would be completely expunged from Imperial record because of something they did? And remember when I also said that their legions would be reabsorbed by the other Space Marine legions? It was around this time that, mysteriously, the Ultramarines somehow got enough manpower to expand from Macragge and to take control over the entire Ultramar subsector in the Imperial South, where also somehow and mysteriously the Ultramarines Legion would almost double in size. As if extra legions were absorbed into the ranks of the Ultramarines. Hey Guilliman, where the hell do those extra bodies come from, huh, buddy? Guilliman, question. Question, Guilliman, question. Hold on a minute. Question, Guilliman. It got to the point where Horus himself knew that if he didn't delay or outright defeat the Ultramarines Legion and Guilliman, he would have a very, very hard time, a very difficult time for to prosecute his own rebellion, to prosecute the rest of the Horus heresy, because he knew just how much raw manpower and firepower the Ultramarines Legion commanded under Guilliman, and how large the Legion now was, right? Right. So, what Horus did with the help of Lorgar and the Word Bearers, he set a trap for the Ultramarines. He sent a message to acting as War Master. He sent a message to Guilliman to rally his forces at the world of Calth, because the Ultramarines, in conjunction with the Word Bearers, would be launching an assault against the Viridian system. Because in Horus's own words, he had uncovered a plot to try that they were going to undermine. They wanted to undermine the control of the Empire, usurp the control of, or usurp the rule of the Imperium. To which Guilliman, being the ever-obedient son, agreed. By the time his forces began mustering at Calth, however, is when Lorgar and Horus sprung their trap. The Word Bearers attacked en masse the amassing troops of the Ultramarines, and war had officially begun. The entire objective was to stymie the Ultramarines from rallying and reaching the rest of the Loyalist forces. Because Horus knew the longer he could delay the Ultramarines from entering the war, the better chance he himself had in prosecuting the rest of the Horus heresy. So, what resulted was the word bearers creating a massive warp storm. It started at the Battle of Calth and grew in power until it finally cut off. It literally cut off a good majority of the galactic south from the rest of the galaxy, right? It cut off specifically the worlds of Macragge and Baal. And in the process, both Sanguinius and Guilliman feared that the Empire was lost. They had no idea that the other Primarchs were still continuing the battle. All they knew is that they were cut off and they had lost all possible communication to any other loyalist forces remaining within the galaxy. And as a result, Guilliman and Sanguinius, and I specifically skipped over this when I talked about Sanguinius earlier, they enacted a contingency known, and this is a little controversial. This is a little controversial if you think about it, and this is actually something that Lionel Johnson brought up to Guilliman in the modern timeline. They enacted something they called Imperium Secundus. And what this meant was literally a second empire, a backup empire. Because Guilliman and Sanguinius thought the Imperium lost, they thought that they could just simply restart. But not on Terra, on Macragge. On Macragge. It was started by 3 of the loyalist Primarchs who had feared that the rest of that the remaining loyalists were destroyed already. It was Sanguinius, Lionel Johnson, and Rabutek Guilliman, the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, and the Ultramarines, with Sanguinius himself being appointed as Imperator Regis, the regent of Imperium Secundus. So they started, what they wanted to do was to put out feelers and to let any surviving loyalist forces know, regroup at Macragge. We can restart the Imperium here, and when we are strong enough together, we will take the fight back against Horus and the traitors, the rest of the traitors, right? So, that was their plan during the Horus Heresy. Cut off from the rest of the Imperium by the Ruin Storm. The Ruin Storm was created by the Word Bearers. This was their backup plan. Now, the advisor to the Emperor, a man by the name of Malcador the Seagullite, also one of the most powerful, by the way, one of the most powerful psychers on Earth, besides the Emperor himself, just by the way, was concerned, as one would be. Instead of rallying their forces together in a united front to try and attack Horus, Guilliman and his brothers were just down here starting their own emperor, or starting their own empire, starting their own Imperium, and getting ready to Malcador's biggest fear was that Guilliman was going to usurp control from the Emperor. Guilliman was going to take control from the Emperor when, in Guilliman's own mind, if Horus is successful, we need a backup plan. And Malcador's just like, if this is a backup plan, why are you actually making your own little empire down here? It's supposed to be a backup plan, not like the actual plan. What the hell are you doing? So luckily, by M31, it was finally revealed to Guilliman and Sanguinius and Johnson that Yes, the Emperor was still alive. Yes, Terra had still endured. It's fine. So the Triumvirate would abandon their Imperium Secundus project, considering that it was both redundant and ever so slightly heretical. Ever so slightly heretical. And Guilliman, Sanguinius, and Lionel Johnson would finally get their shit back together and rejoin the fight to retake the remainder of, push back the heresy. The Horus Heresy, not whatever the hell it is they were thinking of. But I digress. It was after the Horus Heresy where Rabute Guilliman would probably introduce his greatest piece of tactical and military acumen. And this is where Guilliman would cement himself in the history books as one of the greatest military minds the Imperium ever had. It was after the Horus Heresy that Guilliman would introduce what would eventually be known, if the wiki will load it, thank you, as the Codex Astartes. This was Guilliman's grand plan to make sure that something like the Horus Heresy would never, ever, 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 ever happen again. Cross your fingers. Because in Guilliman's mind, the reason why the Horus Heresy was so successful is because one person had the ability to command a legion of superhuman warriors, hundreds of thousands of people large. That kind of military power concentrated in one area is what caused the heresy to grow out of control and spiral out of control so quickly. And in Guilliman's mind, the only way to do that, to prevent that, was to break the legions apart. Space Marine legions would no longer exist as they did at this point. They would now be known as Space Marine chapters. And instead of numbering hundreds of thousands of warriors in size, they would be they would be limited to just 1,000 Space Marines, divided up into 10 different companies. This is how many Space Marine chapters will organize themselves now in the modern timeline of Warhammer 40K. The Codex Astartes is what Guilliman is probably most well known for at this point in time. He is the one who is responsible for the modern structure of Space Marine chapters. I'm just taking a drink, don't mind me. So, it's not all sunshine and roses for Guilliman, unfortunately. As much as he'd love it to be, it ain't all sunshine and roses for Rabute Guilliman here. Because after the Horus Heresy and after he penned the Codex Astartes. During the Battle of Thalassa, Guilliman would speak to a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicum of Mars, a tech priest by the name of Belisarius Cawl. Remember that name because he's going to be very, oh boy, he's going to become very important later on. Guilliman, ever the planner, ever the schemer, right? During the fight with the Alpha Legion and his brother Alfarius, who we will cover soon, Guilliman spoke to Call and tasked Call with two very, very important things. Number one, a way to resurrect not just Guilliman, but any other Primarch should they fall in battle. And number two, the creation of the next generation of Space Marines. Now I want you to think about how Guilliman loves pushing the envelope on what's acceptable in the Imperium of mankind. Because the creation of a Space Marine is seen as an almost divine act by the Emperor, and to take that form and improve upon it is seen by many as incredibly heretical, not just from Call, but from Guilliman as well. So Guilliman just really loves pushing the envelope. He really likes pushing buttons right now. Guilliman just really, really likes pushing buttons right now. So, afterwards, continuing the assault on the battle of the during the Battle of Thalassa, the Emperor's children would make an appearance. Led by their now demon-ascended Primarch Fulgrim, who we'll also talk about very, very soon. Guilliman would be grievously wounded in the battle. Guilliman was stabbed in the neck by a poisoned blade. And again, the Primarchs are like superhuman. You know, regular poison, not going to be a problem for them, right? This was poison created by the god of Slaanesh himself and imbued onto the blade that Fulgrim now carried. This was a poison specifically designed to kill a Primarch. The apothecaries were able to stabilize Guilliman's condition by placing him and interring him in a stasis field. Now, this didn't technically save him. All it did was put him in stasis, like literally mere moments before death. And for 10,000 years, he would remain there. On Macragge, within the realm of Ultramar, stuck in stasis, waiting for a time that, they could figure out a cure and how to bring him back. And bring him back, they did. Bring him back, they did. Because Call in the intervening 10,000 years was very much busy accomplishing exactly what Guilliman had asked him to do. He had begun work on the next generation of Space Marines, and he had found a way to bring a Primarch back from the brink of death. This suit of armor that Guilliman is wearing, as long as he is wearing it, literally regenerates and heals any wound that was visited upon him by Fulgrim 10,000 years ago. And as to the next generation of Space Marines, well, that is where the Primarchs Space Marines come from. Guilliman and Call's update to the Space Marine body and the Space Marine process. I will cover that in its own video because that is going to be an entire thing in and of itself, believe me. So yeah, Guilliman is back. Guilliman is alive once again, still as loyal as ever, serving the Imperium, and is actually now the regent of the Imperium. He has become the regent of the Imperium of Man. Basically a step below the Emperor, but still holding more authority than even the High Lords of Terra themselves, which confound the High Lords of Terra endlessly. So going from Guilliman to the Primarch that wounded Guilliman and stuck his ass in stasis for 10,000 years. This is Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children of Space Marines. And if you like purple and gold, you're gonna love Fulgrim. If you like purple and gold, you're gonna love Fulgrim. So, Fulgrim found his way to the planet of Chemos, a world very poor in resources and beset by weather phenomena on the planet that was just made it almost inhospitable to humans on the surface. But that did not stop a young Fulgrim. No. That did not stop a young Fulgrim at all. Fulgrim would grow up on Chemos. And he would start his life as a humble factory worker, but again, as the other Primarchs did, because they grow up so quickly and have basically all the knowledge they will ever need throughout their lifetime already implanted into them because of, you know, the Primarch project and like the Emperor's ridiculousness. He would eventually rise, just like his other brothers would, to a position of power on Fulgrim. Or on Chemos, rather, excuse me. And 50 years after landing on Chemos, Fulgrim would be the sole leader of the planet of Chemos as well. Sorry, I was just checking something. So, while Fulgrim had rule over Chemos, it would be during that time where the Emperor would, once again, find his way to the planet and locate Fulgrim. And as soon as Fulgrim saw the two-headed eagle, which is the seal and the symbol of the Emperor, the memories immediately started stirring within Fulgrim. He knew this man immediately. He recognized the Emperor almost immediately. Chemos would become the home planet to the Emperor's children, which Fulgrim would name the Legion because at the time he swore undying loyalty to the Emperor. We'll see how long that lasts, Fulgrim. We'll see how long that lasts. And they would actually be quite loyal. They'd be one of the most loyal legions on the, at the very least at the beginning of the Great Crusade. However, a fated encounter would cause Fulgrim's path to descend into chaos and eventually join Horus's heresy. But before that, I need to touch on something, and it is the friendship, the very, very close friendship that Fulgrim had with one of his brothers. Very specifically, Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands. they had such a close friendship with one another that they would actually forge one another a very personal weapon. And they would exchange those weapons as gifts. Fulgrim would create the power hammer known as Forgebreaker for Ferrus Manus. There it is right there. And Ferrus Manus would in turn forge for Fulgrim a blade known as, I literally just saw it, the Fire Blade, which is what Fulgrim is carrying here, and you can actually see Manus forging here. Right? Keep that in mind, because that is going to become very, 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 oh boy. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So, the path to Fulgrim's essentially damnation and the path to heresy all began when the Emperor's children initiated the cleansing of the Laeran, a Xenos species in the fringe of the galaxy. And the Emperor's children were tasked to destroy the Laer, because they posed a threat to the colonies on the outskirts of the Imperium. So Fulgrim, being the loyalist that he was at the time, agreed. What he found, however, was that the Laer were sort of devolving into or participating in acts and rituals and a lot of things. Let's just say the Laer were participating in a lot of things that will probably get me demonetized and kicked off the platform if I were to start explaining what they were doing in any sort of fashion, in any sort of detail. I'm gonna move on. Anyway, during that campaign, Fulgrim would come into contact and would come into possession of another sword. A sword simply known as the Blade of the Laer, or the Laeran Blade. It looked exceedingly different from the fire sword that Ferrus Manus had forged for him, and that Fulgrim had been using up until this point. Right? Unbeknownst to Fulgrim, the blade and also the Laer species or as a whole had sworn themselves to the service of the chaos god Slaanesh. They had sworn themselves to the service of the chaos god Slaanesh, the prince of excess. You know, excess, debauchery. I'm gonna stop there before I get demonetized. I'm gonna stop there before. I'm gonna stop. Just look it up. Trust me. Anyway, unbeknownst to Fulgrim, within the silver blade of the Laer was the essence of a demon prince of Slaanesh, and it would begin to corrupt Fulgrim. It would begin to corrupt his mind. It would begin to warp his perception of reality, and it would spread from Fulgrim to the rest of the Emperor's children until the Emperor's children were fully corrupted and fully enthralled in the grip of the chaos god Slaanesh. So by the time Horus came around and approached Fulgrim with his idea, with his heresy, with his rebellion, Horus himself finally would come to realize, wait, I see you have already embraced the gifts I was going to tell you, brother. It is good then. Join me. Join me and we'll overthrow our father together. And obviously, Fulgrim, now being fully possessed by the silver blade of the Lair and in the thrall of Slaanesh, agreed. Now here's the fucked up thing, right? Here's the fucked up thing. Fulgrim's consciousness was still in there. He just could do nothing. The essence of the demon that was inside the blade went on to take control of Fulgrim's body, but Fulgrim's original consciousness was still trapped in there somewhere. It was still trapped in there. He could see what was happening, but he could do nothing to stop it. Which comes full circle in what happened during the Istvan V drop site massacre. Because remember what I said earlier. The Iron Hands were a part of the Istvan V assault team. And when it was revealed that Fulgrim had joined Horus and his heresy and his rebellion, Fulgrim flew into a rage. He flew into an unbridled rage. He wanted nothing more than to corner Fulgrim and beat him within an inch of his life for this treachery. Because in Ferris's own mindset, Fulgrim didn't just betray the Emperor, he didn't just betray the Imperium, he betrayed the trust and the friendship that they had built up with one another between both Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus. And unfortunately for Ferrus Manus, because Fulgrim had now the full blessing of Slaanesh, he easily outdueled Fulgrim. And probably to whatever shred of Fulgrim's consciousness was left in his own body, to his own horror, the demon of Slaanesh using Fulgrim's body not only killed Ferrus Manus, but beheaded him as well. Ferrus Manus having the unfortunate distinction of being the first Primarch to fall in battle during the Horus Heresy, having been killed by a man he once called brother, by a man he once called his friend. It's really fucked up, honestly, it is. Fulgrim would go on to ascend to demonhood. He would also join the ranks of the other demon Primarchs after the Horus Heresy, and would continue to lead the Emperor's children as a fully ascended demon prince of Slaanesh. And he's a snake man now. He's got wings, he's got 4 arms, he's got a snake tail. Yeah. He's fully demonic now. He's fully ascended to the status of demon Primarch. So now let's look at the other Primarch in that dynamic. Let us talk now of the Gorgon, Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands Legion of Space Marines. And no, you're not seeing things, chat. Ferrus Manus literally has metallic arms. He has metallic arms. That is because during his early life, he would slay on the planet of Medusa. He would slay a great silver worm, basically a giant creature that was native to Medusa, and the blood. He literally used his superhuman strength to drown the worm in magma, and the melted flesh of the worm would fuse to Ferrus Manus' skin, making his arms essentially entirely impervious to all damage. So if you look on his armor, if you look at his power armor, he doesn't have gauntlets that cover his arms at all. He just has these little decorative things here, because it turns out that Worm's flesh that's now seared and, you know, bonded to his limbs is just as strong as ceramite power armor. Literally just as strong as ceramite power armor. It's a little wild. Ferrus Manus, much like Vulcan, was known to be a very, very good, extremely talented blacksmith, and a tactician, an almost cold and calculating tactician. Mostly because within the Iron Hands Legion of Space Marines, there was, and again, mostly because of Ferrus's metallic arms, metallic limbs, there was a sense within the Legion, of the Iron Hands Legion, that their flesh, that even their superhuman augmented flesh, was still quite weak. So it is during that point where, like, the Iron Hands Legion of Space Marines would begin to replace parts of their own body with bionics. And they would, as a result, they would become very close with the Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars, you know, the people who follow the machine god, the Omnissiah. So they would be the ones who would sort of like pioneer like that sort of mentality that, you know, the flesh is weak, the flesh is capable of making mistakes, but if we replace our weakened flesh with bionics that can never tire, that can never falter, then we will be the perfect warrior. During the Encountering Great Crusade, after Ferrus Manus reunited with the Emperor and was given control of his Space Marine legions, which he would rename the Iron Hands, they would literally be just a wave of unstoppable destruction. The Iron Hands were very, very adept in utilizing tanks and armored spearheads in their assaults, mostly because if you just look, yeah, there it is. If you look at Ferrus Manus, his pack here has all the tools, has a bunch of different tools. There's a chain blade, there's a plasma cutter, there's a flame welder, because Ferrus Manus, being Ferrus Manus, he was not only a great tactician, not only a great warrior in his own right, much like Vulcan, he was a very talented blacksmith. Where Vulcan brought his gifts to bear in creating individual weapons, Ferrus Manus brought his gifts to bear in making sure the literal machines of war that his legion ran on would be running at peak and optimum efficiency. Right? Right. So, unfortunately, as we have seen when we were talking about Fulgrim sometime earlier, Ferrus Manus would, unfortunately, meet his end at the hands of his brother Fulgrim during the Istvan 5 drop site massacre. Himself, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders would be ambushed by the forces of the traitor legions, and they would be brought low. Like, their legion would literally almost be eliminated down to a man on the Istvan, you know, during Istvan. So, like, they barely survived, but it would very much, unfortunately, cost Ferrus Manus his life, which is just unfortunate. Is very, very much unfortunate. Oh god. I've spent so much time rambling today, I didn't realize what time it was. Goodness gracious. All right. Chat, you know what? Because I do have D&D tonight, and I want to get dinner beforehand, there's going to have to be a part 2 to this. Going through a list of 18 Primarchs took a little bit longer than I thought, unfortunately. So there's going to have to be a part 2 to this stream as well as this video. So we're going to stop it here. We're gonna pick it up with Magnus the Red the next time we do this 40K lore deep dive stream. How's that sound? Sounds good? Sounds good. All right. I didn't want to have to split this into 2 different parts, but it just dawned on me, A, how much time has passed, and B, how much information I just had to cover, actually. So it's a little daunting, unfortunately. So there will be a part 2 to this. We'll give it a couple of weeks. We'll come back to it. We will come back to it.